Hi there. It's Monday morning. Yay. This is Bob Coppage, CoMITs for MSPs, Crotchio Geek, whatever. I realize it's been a little bit since I last added a video on CoMITs here to the Facebook group. So here's the latest. And what I wanted to talk about, and I've actually been having this conversation with a few people lately, and that is, as you know, I've been talking for a while about what makes a good CoMITs MSP, and essentially the whole idea of you have to define what your vision of CoMITs is because nobody's doing that. Everybody's just saying we do co-managed. But here's the thing. What about the vendors? What do we basically say makes a good vendor in terms of a CoMITs relationship? Now, if you've read the book or heard me talk or had weird dreams or whatever, you know that I talk a lot about the concept of taking your stamps, services, tools, methodologies, portals, whatever, and then making them available to the internal IT folks in one form or another, depending upon the layer of CoMITs. In some cases, it's you give it to them and you just support them when needed. In other cases, the internal IT will take responsibility for some aspect of IT, servers, infrastructures, and the like, and you'll take responsibility for the other endpoints, users, the like, vice versa, whatever. But the thing is that this implies a certain level of flexibility, but focused flexibility on the part of the vendors who are providing the tools and the portals for you. So let's talk a little bit, and I want to be clear here. Since a stamp that we're sharing can be anything from a training tool or documentation all the way up to, no, this is the core behind it, backups or the like. The actual requirement of the tool changes dramatically. I get that. So take this, each one of these points is applicable, some more so than others, either based on the particular need of the internal IT folks or the particular need of the tool itself. So with that, one, does the vendor actually talk about CoMITs? And if they talk about it, do they talk about it beyond, hey, we're great for CoMITs? There's different organizations that are actually full in. They're looking for ways to partner with MSPs in terms of co-managed IT relationships. And then there's others who are just saying, we see that as a new run-in technology. Either way, but the whole thing is, do they at least mention it? And if you had to give them a 1 through a 10, what kind of rating would you give them? Over the past few months, I'm seeing more and more vendors who are talking about CoMITs more and more, but usually as they're simply talking about it as an opportunity, not necessarily as a strategy, and boy, there's a difference. Okay, that's number one. And by the way, these are in no particular order. The second is delegated access. So one of the whole things we want to do is we want to give access to these tools, to these stamps, to the internal IT folks. Well, can we basically take a look at the vendor security model and give some form or layer of delegated access to the internal IT? Now, we can have flexibility. You can almost think about it in terms of your technicians may require a different level of access than your technical leaders versus the management. Well, the same thing's true now for an additional layer over to the internal IT. Again, depending upon the tool type and depending upon what the internal IT roles are. But delegated access. Third, layered access. So layered access can also be where you have something where we have one client who is using the product, but the client needs access to the tool for the product that they're responsible for. So we're going to give them access, and let's say, again, it's we're doing the servers, they're doing the workstations. So we want to give them access to the tools for the workstations, but not necessarily for the servers. I'm not saying that's always the case, but do we have that kind of layered access within the portal for the client? So can we really layer it down and break it down? Is this a game changer or is this a deal breaker? That's up to you. But we would like to have that kind of layered access. So, number 4, flexible configurations. Now, flexible configurations can be all over the place. Now, you probably already have that requirement with your pure MSP clients, because in the pure MSP requirements, you still have clients who have ridiculously different needs. If you have one who is a plumber and another one who is a manufacturing company who's doing work for the DoD, yes, it's very important to both of them, but because of whatever requirements, you could have a SOX, a HIPAA, whatever, they could be very, very different. So can you be flexible for the confederation? Can you be flexible with the configurations? Next, flexible alerting. In some cases, the alert that you get for a product that you're responsible for as the MSP is different than an alert that the internal IT client gets that they're responsible, but then what kind of alerting do you still want? So can you basically make it so that you want a reminder if the client is not dealing with the stuff as fast as they should, but you also don't want your technicians to be confused as to which ones they should act upon and which ones are actually being delegated to the internal IT folks of somebody else. Now, some of that can actually be handled by workflow rules or the like for your PSA or RMM tool, but it would be even better if it could be handled on the stamp itself. By the way, obviously RMM and PSA tools are huge, huge tests for as far as how ready they are for CoMITs. Okay. Split responsibilities. So again, and this is kind of implied with the first 5 points, but again, if there are clear responsibilities, if the internal IT is taking care of everything, well, then clearly the responsibility is on them. They can escalate a tool or escalate a ticket over to you, which is a requirement, but they need to. You need to be able to basically say, their responsibility. They need to take care of it. Okay. By the same token, it would be nice if you had reminders that basically said, hey, they haven't taken care of it and they should. So you can essentially back them up by saying, hey, this workstation hasn't reported in from an endpoint standpoint, or this machine has this issue, or this end user has this issue, and it hasn't been dealt with. Again, depending upon the relationship and the agreement, that kind of flexibility in terms of alerting would be nice. Change management. So one of the challenges I hear a lot with the CoMITs when I'm talking with MSPs is how do you make sure that the right people are responsible for the changes that they're making and the like? Well, and honestly, that's true if you have multiple people with access to the same resources. So if you have just a strictly internal IT and you've got 3 internal IT people and a change happens, how are they tracking who made it? Similarly, if an MSP is working on a particular server, workstation, whatever, how do we later go back and track the changes that were made? So it's still there, but it's made a little bit more interesting because there's actually 2 organizations involved. So the same question is there, the complexity is increased. So from tracking change management, one of the things you need to look out for is there are some, and thankfully the number's getting fewer and fewer, but there are some of these stamps that only have one set of credentials. And that's a little bit tough because then you have to give both parties the same credentials, which means how do you know who actually logged in at a particular point in time? That's one issue if it's always going to be the MSP. It's just a question of who at the MSP. It's a bigger issue if it's either internal IT or the MSP and you can't tell which one. But that said, the next level is how do we track change management? How can we tell what changes were made, who made them, and when? So this is one of those, and again, it kind of depends on the stamp. It kind of depends on the requirements, both on the internal IT folks, the client overall, as well as the MSP. But that's one of the things to take a look at when you're evaluating stamps. And then the last one, and I think one of the ones that's the most important, is training. Because here's the problem. A lot of us are buying these stamps, and we're buying the stamps through a managed service agreement with the vendor. And usually the managed service agreement includes support and training of our technicians. So vendor XYZ may have a complete portal, may have onboarding tools, may have videos galore, documentation, whatever, for myself, my leadership team, technology leadership team, and all the technicians. But what about now? I'm actually going out to my clients. And I'm going out to my clients and said, hey, go use this tool. Now, in some cases, the stamp isn't available for purchase for that client, so there's no training at all available. Or in other cases, the training is actually a product to be sold with selling the product to that client. We're not selling it to the client. So this is one of the ones where even the organizations that are most vocal about their support for co-managed IT services, I see this is the conversation that always stops them in their track. And I get it. This is still relatively new, which is why I get back to that first point. Do they actually talk about CoMITs? But one of the questions that you can ask, and this is one that I've had some experience or some success talking with vendors who have made exceptions or figured out ways for us to accomplish it or whatever. But at the very least, let them make sure that they're aware. Because if we want to deploy, whether it be endpoint protection, the RMM, the PSA, the firewalls, the documentation, the training tools themselves, the whatever, a lot of those we want to give delegated access to the internal IT folks so they can use it. And in order to do that, we have to train them. And in order to train them, we have to come up with our own training in a lot of cases. So we recently did, it wasn't even recently, it was back in November, back when people were able to sit next to each other. Remember that? Back in November, we did a 2-day on-site here training session. We had about 8 or 9 of our CoMITs technicians who came in. And we spent 2 days, and we did mostly we developed our own training materials because we didn't have anything else. Now, we had some YouTube videos, we had some PDFs, we had some stuff we could share, but otherwise we had to pretty much put this stuff together. Now, since we're planning on doing this again someday, that'll be fine. But that's an expense. And especially if you're essentially going to that client and you're selling them on the CoMITs, they're going to be using these stamps and they're going to get trained on it, then you better have an answer to that question of how are we getting trained on it. And it would be fantastic if the training actually had something to do with CoMITs, but at this point, that's too much to expect. So, do they talk about CoMITs? Is there delegated access, layered access, flexible configurations, flexible alerting, split responsibilities? Do they track change management? And is there training? These are the top 8 points that I think make a good stamp vendor for CoMITs MSPs. Now, this is in its infancy, so I don't expect any vendor to do everything perfectly right out of the gate. The question is, do they accept that fact and are they moving forward to improve? I'd love to hear some comments from you guys as far as who are the best vendors you're working with CoMITs and where do you think this is going, and did I miss any of the points? Thanks. Bob Coppage. CoMITs for MSPs, Crotch the Old Geek.